Welcome, fellow travelers, to a journey across time and sand. Tonight, we set sail with fearless Viking explorers, venturing far beyond the icy fjords of the north to follow the fabled Silk Road, a path of wonders, mysteries, and ancient sift. Together, we will cross the Caspian waters, brave whispering deserts, and uncover forgotten kingdoms on the way to the golden lands of Egypt. Sit back, let the world around you fade, and allow this story to carry you into an age of fire-lit markets, lost empires, and the courage of those who walked roads no map could define. If you enjoy this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us bring more tales of history, myth, and adventure to life. Now let the story begin. Our Viking journey awaits. A crisp wind cuts through the dark forest like a blade, stirring the tall pine trees along the edge of the fjord. The world is quiet, except for the soft crunch of boots on frozen moss and the distant howl of a wolf. The aurora borealis shimmers above like ghostly ribbons of green and purple, swaying as if breathing with the earth itself. Leif Thorgilsson stands atop a crag overlooking the icy harbor. Below, a longship, sleek and carved with serpent heads, rocks gently against the shoreline. Torches flicker across the camp. The scent of pine tar and salted fish hangs thick in the air. Behind him, the village is awake despite the hour. Women hum funeral songs, and children watch in silence, their cheeks red from cold and emotion. This is not just a voyage, it is a departure from everything known. Brynhild approaches Leif quietly, her boots barely making a sound on the frost-bitten earth. She touches his arm, not to stop him, but to steady herself. "You've packed enough dried fish to feed Thor himself," she mutters. Leif's face cracks into a faint smile, then fades. "The gods are not coming with us, no," Brynhild says. "Only fools and dreamers." They stand in silence. The fjord glows in moonlight, the water black and reflective like obsidian. Snow begins to fall, light like ash from an old fire. Down at the docks, Eric the Silent sharpens his blade. The rhythmic drag of stone on steel breaks the hush. He glances up at Leif, nodding once. The others, 10 men in furs and wool, with helmets dangling from their belts, gather supplies, dried meats, iron tools, sacks of barley, crates of amber. They're not just warriors, they are merchants, fathers, explorers. Each one carries a small leather pouch around his neck, a mix of soil from their homeland and a carved wooden rune for protection. The village seeress, old Helga, begins a chant by the stone altar. Her voice is cracked but commanding, and the villagers join in. Flames flare high. She throws sage and bone into the fire. The smoke swirls upward, coiling like a serpent into the night sky. Leif walks toward her, eyes narrowed. She reaches into her robes and pulls out a small item wrapped in linen. A bone carving of a raven, Odin's messenger. "You will face sand, Leif Thorgilsson," she whispers. "Not snow, and your enemies will not speak your tongue." "I do not expect kindness," he replies. She grins, toothless. "But perhaps you will find a story worth singing." The ceremony ends. Men move into position, loading the final crates onto the longship. The tide creeps higher. Time is running out. Brynhild presses a leather pouch into Leif's hand. Inside is a lock of her hair, bound with a silver thread. She says nothing. He nods and places it inside his tunic. Eric tosses the last crate onto the ship. The warriors board swiftly, their boots thud on the planks. One man hums a sea shanty. Another sharpens a harpoon. A third quietly weeps, then wipes his face before anyone notices. Leif turns to face the village. "We leave not as shadows, but as sons of ice and salt," he says, his voice firm and echoing through the stillness. "Our stories will follow the stars." With that, he climbs aboard. The crew lowers their oars. The ship pushes away from the dock. The villagers raise their hands in unison, half blessing, half farewell. as the vessel slices through the silver-tipped waters of the fjord. The aurora overhead brightens as if stirred by the motion. The ship's dragon prow leads them toward the mouth of the sea, and beyond it, the silk-swept lands of the east. The journey has begun. The longship glides over black water as dawn begins to bloom faintly on the horizon. The sky, moments ago speckled with stars and veils of northern light, slowly shifts into gradients of blue and pearl. Sea mist clings to the edges of the vessel, trailing like a bridal train behind them. Leif stands at the prow, hand resting on the carved dragon's head. His breath is visible in the chill air, drops of water bead in his beard, salt crust forming in his eyebrows. His cloak flutters, half frozen where it touches the damp hull. He looks down at the timbers beneath him, oaken ribs, hand-hewn, bound with iron. The ship creaks softly, as though alive. He dips 2 fingers into the sea, draws them across the dragon prow, and mutters a few words. Njordur, guide us. Thor, guard us. Freyja, forgive us. Behind him, Eric pulls the oar in rhythm. His strokes are perfect, no wasted motion. His shoulders flex like iron hinges, and though he says nothing, he listens to the ship's heartbeat through every vibration in the wood. Above, gulls circle and cry. The coastline is already retreating behind them, fading into white mist and jagged silhouettes. Crew rows in solemn unity. The only sound is the oars breaking the surface and the wind lightly combing the sail. Torvald, the carpenter, crouches near the mast, rubbing a piece of oil-soaked linen into a knot in the wood. His fingers trace each grain with reverence. Still breathing she is, he whispers. You cut her down young, but she's proud of the journey. One of the younger crewmen, Jalti, peers over the edge, watching shadows swim beneath them. Do you think sea spirits follow us? He asks nervously. Leif turns his head. They follow all who break the horizon, he says. But they fear a ship with oaths in its keel. He walks to the center of the ship, reaching into a leather satchel. From it, he draws a small drinking horn, carved with runes. He lifts it and speaks Borandets. We sail not just to trade, but to write names across the sand where no snow has ever fallen. Let the gods hear our vow. We will return not empty-handed, nor forget the land of our birth. He pours a few drops of mead into the sea, then hands the horn to Eric, who drinks without ceremony. It passes to each man. When it reaches Torvald, he pours his share onto the mast. To the tree that became our wings, he says. The ship rocks slightly as a wave strikes it broadside. No one speaks. The silence isn't fear, it is awe. The open sea stretches wide now. The coast is gone. Before them lies only water and sky, and beyond that, the unknown lands whispered of in port markets. Deserts of glass, cities of gold, rivers that run backward. Suddenly, a pod of orcas breaches to starboard. Black and white giants cut through the surface, like blades, spouting mist. The men cheer. It's a sign. Leif touches the dragon prow again, a quiet thanks to whatever force is watching. They adjust the sail. The wind catches it full now, and the oars are raised. The ship rides swift and light, its narrow hull slicing with grace. Hours pass. The sun climbs, and the cold eases slightly. A small island appears ahead, nothing more than a rock with a few twisted trees. Leif orders a brief stop. They anchor and gather on shore. Each man finds a stone and carves their initials into it. They build a low cairn facing the sea. This, Leif says, is our first marker. If we do not return, let it be known. We were here, we lived, we dared. They stand in a circle and press their hands to the cairn. Even Eric, the silent one, whispers a few words. Back on the ship, the fire in their bellies is brighter. The cold is no less sharp, but the fear has ebbed. They row again, this time toward the east, into warmer winds and unfamiliar stars. The north watches them go. The longship shrinks into the mist, oars rising and falling like the beating wings of a distant myth. The morning begins with a hush. too quiet, as though the ocean itself holds its breath. Clouds roll in slowly at first, like bruises spreading across the sky. The crew exchanges uneasy glances. The sun is no longer visible, and the water darkens to a steely gray. The air turns sharp, and the sea begins to buck under them. Leif squints into the distance. "Storm," he says grimly. Without further command, the crew springs into motion. Eric grunts, grabbing thick rope and cinching down the sail. His movements are precise, measured. A man who has weathered the sea's worst tempers before. Torvald ties down crates and tools, every knot firm and prayerful. At the stern, Svala the seeress emerges from the hold. Until now, she had remained silent and shadowed, her presence tolerated but never welcomed by all. Her hair whips in the rising wind, and her feathered cloak rattles like dry bones. She lifts a curved horn carved with knotwork and blows. Once a low, hollow sound that seems to echo inside the waves themselves. The crew pauses, eyes wide. Svala speaks, her voice carrying over the mounting roar. "Pridden. Do not curse the storm. It is no enemy, it is the gatekeeper." Leif nods sharply. "Then we pass through it." The wind strikes like a slap across the face. The sail snaps, and snow flurries appear suddenly, swirling sideways, stabbing like tiny needles. Waves rise like the backs of whales, rocking the longship violently. One man stumbles and nearly goes overboard, but Eric grabs him with one massive hand and yanks him back. Water crashes over the bow, soaking everyone. The air tastes of iron. Leif grabs the tiller and fights the ship's direction. "We ride with it," he yells. "Do not fight the sea, feel her motion." The crew obeys. Oars are drawn in. Men huddle low, gripping the sides as the longship begins to surf the storm's energy instead of resisting it. Svala kneels at the center of the deck, eyes closed. Her hands draw shapes in the air, tracing old runes. Her mouth whispers to unseen. A flash of lightning rips through the sky, illuminating the entire vessel in ghostly white. Thunder follows immediately, deafening and brutal. The waves reach high, 2, 3 stories tall. A crate flies loose and smashes against the mast. The sail tears. Leif swears and climbs the spar like a spider, his fingers slipping on wet rope. He grabs the torn edge and pulls it down, wrapping it tight against the beam. The ship shudders again, then rights itself. Eric barks out a command, his only spoken words that day. "Shield wall." The crew assembles on one side, raising their round shields against the spray and sleet. The storm lashes out, but the men hold, muscles straining, backs bent against the weight of wind and water. Suddenly, everything pauses, a strange stillness, the eye of the storm. In this moment, the sea calms to a rolling whisper. The sky opens slightly, revealing a spiral of gray light. Snow falls lightly again, dancing on the breathless air. Svala stands slowly, her voice clear. "We are not dead," she says, "because something wants us to see what lies beyond." Leif's eyes meet hers. "Then let us see it through." Moments later, the other side of the storm descends, less ferocious, but still cruel. The ship rocks and groans, but the worst has passed. The sky begins to break apart. A shaft of golden light touches the edge of the sea. The crew exhales. Some laugh quietly in disbelief. Others pray aloud. Leif climbs back down and nods once. "We live." They begin repairs. Torn ropes are replaced. The sail is patched. Torvald checks the hull and gives a grunt of approval. Eric feeds fire to a brazier to warm frozen hands. Svala sits silently, her runes glowing faintly beneath snowflakes that melt upon her skin. The storm had tested them, not with destruction but with doubt. Now they sail on. The longship glides into a cove beneath steep cliffs and gnarled pine trees, its hull creaking like an old man's bones. Mist still curls around the coastline, giving the island a dreamlike quality. But there is no song here, no birds, no waves lapping cheerfully at the rocks, only silence. Leif squints at the shoreline, narrow, dark, and littered with debris. Broken shields, pieces of hulls, old fires long extinguished, bones, many of them land of death, Eric mutters. Leif nods once. We rest here briefly, leave the ship guarded. Svala steps onto the shore first, barefoot. Her feet leave prints in the black sand. She walks slowly, hands raised, as if reading something in the air. Her mouth opens in a whisper. This place remembers. The others disembark carefully. Gunnar moves inland, slipping between the trees like a shadow. His eyes catch glimmers, shattered pottery, worn iron blades, even the jawbone of a horse half buried in moss. He whistles softly, calling Leif over. This wasn't just a camp, it was a graveyard. Leif kneels beside a collapsed shelter. A few wooden beams remain, splintered by time or storm. Inside, a skeleton lies curled, its arms folded across its chest. Not warriors, Leif mutters, merchants, or pilgrims. Nearby, a child's skull rests under a bush. The crew looks away. Svala kneels near a large driftwood log marked with strange symbols. She brushes away moss and grime with reverent hands. These signs, they're not Norse, not Slavic either, traders from the east, perhaps Khazar or even further. They came west, not east. And they never left, Gunnar adds, no signs of battle. But the bones are thin, starved, no shelter. They likely waited for rescue. They never found it, Eric says flatly, his gaze fixed on the far cliffs. Leif signals the men to build a small fire. Stay close to the ship. We burn incense to honor them. And we don't eat anything from this land. As the fire crackles to life, the crew forms a circle. Svala sprinkles crushed herbs and resin into the flames. The smoke rises slowly, almost respectfully, into the misty air. Leif places a small token, a bronze coin from his homeland, onto the earth beside the child's skull. So you'll know someone returned, he whispers. The island is still, the fire burns cleanly, there is no wind, but a chill remains, deep in the bones. Suddenly, Gunnar returns with something in his hand, a small carved token, ivory shaped like a lotus flower. This is not from the north, he says. I've seen this before, in a trader's pouch in Birka. He said it came from a city where rivers meet the desert. Leif holds it, turning it over. The Silk Road, he says quietly. Even this far north its echo reaches, a realization ripples through the group. This island may have been a way station for more than just Vikings. It might have once been part of something much larger. A hidden link in the web of east-west trade routes, forgotten by maps but remembered by the earth. As night falls, fog thickens again, the fire grows dim. The crew returns to the ship, their steps slower, quieter. Svala lingers last. She presses her hand to a boulder near the beach, her eyes close, and she chants softly. What did you see? Leif asks as she finally boards. A warning, she replies. From the dead to the living, the road is long, and it forgets the weak. They push off silently, their ship slicing back into the Black Sea. Behind them, the island disappears like a fading memory. The fjord narrows, winding between cliffs blackened by ice and shadow. The ship moves slower now, maneuvering carefully through a maze of broken sea ice. Thin floes crack like glass beneath the hull, while thicker sheets threaten to trap them entirely. Leif stands at the helm, staring into the white fog ahead. His breath clouds the air. He's lost in thought, considering the stories passed down by his grandfather, how once a Viking crew chased the sun too far north and were never heard from again. The silence breaks. Ravens, Eric says. Leif snaps his eyes skyward. Two black silhouettes circle above, barely visible in the pale sky. Ravens, not seagulls, not crows. Ravens, rare this far into the cold. Svala stirs and stands, her face turning upward. 1 for sorrow, she murmurs. 2 for death, Ingmar grunts. They bring more than death. I've seen it before. On a voyage to the White Sea, a flock followed us for 3 days. The 4th day, the ice cracked, and we lost half the men. Were you one of them? Leif asks without looking. Ingmar chuckles bitterly. I'm not half a man, am I? Laughter from the crew. A flicker of tension released, but the ravens continue circling. They do not caw, they do not flee, they wait. Eric jumps off the boat onto a nearby ice shelf. He tests the stability, kneels, and presses his ear to the frozen surface. He closes his eye, listening. After a moment he returns, silent as always, but the look on his face says everything. We won't make it far in this direction, Leif concludes. Too thick. We cut south, by east. Svala steps forward. The birds are waiting. For what? Ingmar asks. For us to fail. Suddenly, she clutches her chest and crumples. The men rush to her side, but Leif signals them back. He kneels beside her, holding her hand. She whispers, eyes fluttering. I see them, warriors in white, skin like bone, with eyes the color of sea glass. They speak without tongues. They say we're on the wrong tide. Then she faints. The light fades rapidly in the Arctic dusk, painting the sea with silvery indigo. Fog clings low to the water like a restless spirit, and the longship, nestled in a clutch of slow-drifting ice floes, bobs gently. It's too thick to move. The men rest their oars. We anchor here, Leif says. He doesn't mean with iron, but with patience. The crew groans, weary. They loop ropes through hollow clefts in the floes to keep the ship steady. Torvald checks the beams, running his hands over the hull, where the wood is beginning to groan from expanding cold. Eric, silent and attentive, crouches at the ship's edge. He watches the water through the mist. The ice around them is shifting, but not with the wind. Slowly, gently it pulses, as though the sea is breathing. Svala stirs below deck. Leif enters the small shelter, where she lies wrapped in wool and fur. Her eyes flutter open. Do you hear them? She whispers. Hear who? He asks. She doesn't answer. Leif leaves her with a flask of warmed mead, hoping her strength will return by morning. Night falls completely. Stars blink faintly overhead, dimmed by haze. The men sleep in turns, 4 on, 4 off, while Eric and Torvald remain awake. Something strange about this place, Torvald mutters, tightening a rope. Eric says nothing, but he doesn't disagree. His eye is locked on the black water beneath the floes. Suddenly, a dull tapping echoes up from the hull. Knock, knock, knock. Torvald stiffens. That's not water. They both lean over the side. Beneath the ship, the ice is clear in places. Movement flickers beneath it. Not fish. Something slower, more deliberate. Torvald whispers, could be old timbers breaking, but then it comes again. Knock, 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 as if someone, or something, is knocking from below. Eric climbs down to the lower deck, where Svala has already risen. She stands barefoot again, swaying slightly, her face lifted toward the sky. They never left, she says. Eric waits, unmoving. They were buried beneath the sea. Not by snow, not by storm, but by memory. Their bones? They dream, and when we drift above them they speak. She points to the ice. Can't you hear it? Now the whole ship seems to creak with it, groaning not from wood, but from a pressure that is ancient and suffocating. Leif appears, gripping his dagger tightly. Keep quiet, he orders. This place wants silence. Even Torvald obeys. No one breathes for a long moment. The knocks fade, but the feeling does not. In the deep of the night, as most of the crew sleep, Svala whispers to herself. She repeats the same line like a lullaby. Below the ice, memory walks. Below the sea, the silence talks. A thin crack appears across one of the floes. Not threatening, just eerie. It zigzags in silence, dividing the moonlight like a mirror shattered in slow motion. Leif doesn't sleep. He keeps his eyes on the stars above, aligning their path toward the east. "We leave before sunrise," he mutters. And they do. At first light, they untie from the ice. No one speaks of the knocks, or the whispers, or the dreams, but every man looks into the water, a little longer than he used to. The sun at last returns with warmth, though faint, more imagined than felt. Ice recedes around the longship, and the fjord opens into a quiet bay, surrounded by jagged cliffs and snowy dunes. Seals bob in and out of view like gray stones made flesh. Leif gestures. "We dock here. The men need meat, tools need mending." They beach the vessel in soft gravel. As the men disembark, Eric scouts toward the ridgeline. His footprints press deep into the dampened snow. Below, seal pups bark and scatter, their mothers slipping into water like shadows. Torvald grins. Meat, oil, and hide. Bless the gods, the crew spreads out, cautious yet grateful. Torvald finds the remains of a shelter half covered by drift. Inside, a half-finished skiff sits rotting. He traces the grain with his fingers. These tools were fresh, maybe 2 winters ago. Leif inspects nearby fire pits and bones. No bodies, they left on foot or were taken by sea. He crouches near a pile of bleached seal skulls, arranged in a spiral. This wasn't our doing. Suddenly, a sharp whistle pierces the air. The men freeze. Arrows whiz overhead and bury themselves in the snow nearby. Eric lifts his shield. Leif raises a hand. From the ridge, a lone figure descends. Bow drawn, face hidden under a fur hood, silent steps, smooth and practiced. "Drop your weapons," Leif commands softly. This is not a battlefield. The figure lowers the bow. She steps forward, pulling back her hood. Long ash-blonde hair spills out, and her amber eyes scan each man. "I am Yrsa," she says, voice dry like birch bark. "I was part of a band of raiders, left behind after a sickness took most. I've lived here through 2 dark winters." Leif approaches slowly. "You hunt alone? I eat," she replies. "And I remember," Torvald whispers. "A ghost?" "No," Leif mutters. "A survivor." Yrsa tosses a fresh seal carcass at their feet. "You need this more than I do." The men begin butchering the animal under her guidance. She watches, without emotion. "Further east, the land breaks," she says. "Mountains thin into low hills. There's a river. Ice doesn't reach it. If you follow it south, you'll find warm currents and foreign sails." Leif narrows his eyes. "You've seen them?" Yrsa nods. "Arabs, Greeks, and one ship with painted dragons like yours, but smaller. They traded salt for furs," the crew murmurs. Confirmation of the east. Svala stumbles from the ship. She looks at Yrsa with fogged eyes and says, "You walk with spirits, but none claim you." Yrsa tilts her head. "That's why I remain." Later, they sit around a fire built in a cleft by the shore. Yrsa eats silently with them. Eric roasts seal strips. Torvald salvages planks from the old skiff. The sky is overcast but calm. "We leave at dawn," Leif says. "You'll come with us." Yrsa glances at the hills one last time. This land has no more stories. And so, she joins the crew, not as a stranger, but as one of them. Here, the hard, ancient glacier cracked into ribbons of melting rivers that sparkled like silver threads under the low sun. Meltwater gushed in rivulets, carving serpentine paths between white ridges and slippery boulders. The longship crept slowly now, half rowing, half dragged by ropes and poles along the shallows. The silence was broken only by the sound of water, gushing, dripping, pulsing with the heartbeat of the earth's thaw. Leif stood at the front, his boots submerged ankle-deep in runoff. His hand rested on the hilt of his dagger, but his mind was far away. The flute around his neck tapped against his chest, a gift from his boy left behind in the village they departed. He hadn't played it yet. Behind him, Torvald cursed softly. A hollow thump echoed from under the ship, hulls rubbing on rock. "We'll need to lift her briefly." Yrsa, further ahead, knelt near muddy prints in the slush. Wolves, she muttered. Fresh, she signaled Leif. No fire, no meat scraps left behind, he ordered. And we sleep in pairs. The crew obeyed without question. Torvald directed the men to push the longship sideways with poles. With a creak and a splash, the vessel slipped into a deeper stream. He hammered in a wooden wedge to patch a weak joint along the keel, muttering blessings to Ninjordur. As the day wore on, the light grew gold. The sky turned into a copper dome, and the wind carried the scent of damp moss and fresh melt. First green I've smelled in weeks, Hjalti said. His voice cracked as he climbed to the prow. This deserves a song, only if it's short, Leif warned. Hjalti cleared his throat dramatically and sang in a nasal, cheerful tone. Tirendo. From frozen teeth the waters run. With seal meat chewed and snow undone, we chase the sun from fjord to dune, and pray to drink from summer. Soon the men laughed. Even Eric's mouth twitched in something that might have been amusement. Torvald clapped Hjalti on the back. You keep that up, boy, and you'll have to sing at every camp. Leif smiled faintly. The mood had lifted. The singing echoed across the glacier and into the sky. As night fell, they made camp by a stone outcrop where moss had begun to grow. They lit no fires, Yrsa's warning still fresh, but they warmed themselves with dry furs and shared a jar of thick honeyed mead. Svala stirred from the shadows, her voice hoarse. You sing songs while the ice forgets itself, she said. Leif turned to her. What do you see? Not death, she whispered, but loss, like the last breath of winter as it surrenders to heat. Some things do not melt quietly. Leif nodded. Then we listened closely. Later, as the others slept, he sat alone and lifted the flute to his lips. A soft, uncertain note echoed into the cold. Another followed, a third, each one clearer. The song was not perfect, but it was his. The trail narrowed into stump. The meltwater river they had followed for days had vanished beneath rock, swallowed by the earth. What remained was a dry riverbed that twisted like a serpent between two sheer cliffs. Leif stood at the edge, brows furrowed. The water goes underground, Yrsa nodded. Titition. It will return below where the mountain breathes. We carry the ship, Leif said. Not as a question, but as an order. The crew groaned. Portage was always dreaded, a brutal reminder that even sea wolves must crawl sometimes. They unloaded the longship, fashioning makeshift rollers from stripped logs. Torvald grunted instructions as the men lifted the keel. Easy! She's a beast, but she wants to help us. They rolled forward foot by foot, ship creaking like an old spirit across stone. Eric walked ahead, scanning the gorge. Something about it felt strange, too quiet, too symmetrical. The shadows didn't fall where they should. He paused to adjust his grip on the axe, always ready. Further up the trail, Yrsa crouched beside a pile of mossy rocks. Her fingers traced carved runes, weathered but still readable. Vikings, she called. Someone came before. Leif approached and knelt. What does it say? Yrsa read aloud. In fire we sought the east, in stone we waited for silence. Svala, who had walked in near silence for hours, turned to them. This place, it remembers. Leif tilted his head. What do you mean, volcano? She said softly. Long ago, this canyon is its grave. The river runs through its bones. The gorge began to hum faintly, so soft it might have been imagination. Wind slithered between the rock walls, carrying distant echoes that sounded like chants. Night approached quickly here, shadows descending in thick blue layers. The men pitched a small camp beside a crack in the gorge wall, where a trickle of clear water seeped through. They drank cautiously, murmuring thanks. Svala plucked small mountain flowers growing along the rocks, white with violet centers. She tucked them into the folds of her cloak. These are flame flowers, she whispered. They bloom only where fire once touched snow. Eric tested the ground with his axe handle. Solid, he said at last. They resumed the portage. Sweat glistened on their foreheads despite the cold. The ship groaned but moved. Each inch was hard-won. When the full moon rose above the canyon, it illuminated something ahead. A sudden drop. Leif halted the crew. Below, the river re-emerged from the mountain, flowing swiftly in a wide bend. If they could reach it, they could sail again. "Build a sled," Leif said. Torvald nodded. "We'll slide her down with control." They worked through the night. Ropes, sled planks, sanded rock. Before dawn, they stood at the ledge, the ship ready to descend. Svala stepped forward, staff in hand. She planted it into the earth and whispered, "May the gods of ice and fire allow safe passage." They released the ropes. The longship slid, dust and sparks flew. Wood scraped stone. The crew held their breath. With a final bounce, the vessel splashed into the river below and stayed afloat. Cheers erupted. Leif exhaled, finally allowing himself a moment of pride. They had found the river beneath the mountain, and it would carry them east.
Dawn broke quietly, spilling gold, and rose across the peaks. The longship sat ready at the base of the gorge, half floating, half lodged against the riverbank. The air was different, lighter, less burdened with frost. A gull cried overhead, followed by the distant scent of pine and wet soil. Leif ran his fingers through the river's current. No ice, no slush, just fast, fresh water rushing from the mouth of the mountain. "This is our gate," he whispered. Eric stood at the prow, testing the rudder. "We row slow. Let the water guide us." The ship creaked as it pulled into motion. The crew was silent, eyes fixed forward. They drifted along a narrowing valley, the river winding through jagged cliffs, softening into hills. Snow remained on the peaks, but below green moss crept down the stone. Trees reappeared. First pines, then sparse birches. Svala stirred from beneath her furs. "The veil has thinned," she said. Winter is behind us, but what lies ahead does not speak our tongue." Yrsa sat on the forward beam, bow strung and eyes alert. Smoke, far left bank, could be shepherds. Or worse, Leif adjusted their course to the opposite side, keeping low near the reeds. "We avoid contact until we know the customs." Birdsong broke the silence for the first time in days. Hjalti murmured, "Feels wrong." "No," Torvald replied. "Feels like waking up from a nightmare." The river widened into a basin, flat and glassy. Reflection rippled across its surface, showing the crew as pale ghosts drifting across the water. The land was new, yet somehow familiar. Then they saw it, the last iceberg, alone, blue-white, jagged like a crown, drifting south with no knowledge it didn't belong here. It turned gently, cracked once with a hollow boom, then split in two. The crew watched in silence. "A sign," Svala said. "One age ends, another begins." They passed it slowly, the sound of the split still echoing behind them. The sun climbed higher. Warmth returned, slow and cautious. The men shed a layer of furs. The water no longer hissed with cold. It danced. They reached the delta by mid-morning. The river split into fingers of green and gold, winding between willows and sunlit rocks. Birds of bright feathers called out. Yrsa leaned over the side and dipped her hand into the stream. "No salt yet," she said, "but close," Eric replied. "I can smell the sea." Leif stood, gaze far off. "From here we go to the cities. Silk, spice, strangers, no more ice," Hjalti whispered. "No more snow," said Torvald. Svala lifted her head and declared, "We have crossed the veil. We are no longer the north. We are the question at the edge of the east." The ship continued forward, its sails now ready to catch southern winds. The chapter of frost was closed. Ahead was warmth, mystery, and myth. The Viking longship, reborn in the river's mouth, passed silently into a new world. The village of trade was unlike any place they had seen since leaving the fjords. It rose from a muddy riverbank like a crown of timber and smoke. Walls of woven reeds fortified with log palisades, adorned with bones, symbols, and fluttering scraps of colored cloth. The scent was overpowering: salt, tallow, fermented apples, horse dung, and roasted fish. Dozens of flags flew from makeshift poles. Each represented a clan, a caravan, or a warband who'd passed through and paid for space. Baltic trade post, Leif murmured. Radek's court, the longship was moored beside dozens of others. Arab dhows with golden sails, Russ's rafts laden with honey and bearskins, even a Finnish canoe tied with delicate iron chains. This was not the wilderness. It was civilization at the edge of a sword. Leif stepped off the ship in his formal blue tunic, every step confident but measured. He carried no shield, only his curved dagger of Norse silver. Yrsa followed, scanning faces. Traders, thieves, and monks moved together like dancers in a crowded ritual. She spotted weapons everywhere, tucked beneath robes, hanging from belts, glinting from rooftops. Inside the central hall, beneath a canvas roof tied with amber-threaded ropes, sat Radek, the Amber Lord. He rose as they entered. Tall, massive, the smell of clove oil clinging to him like perfume. Ah! Icebeards from the northern rim. I had heard your sails cut through the frost like Valkyries. Leif bowed slightly. We bring trade and news from the fjords. Radek grinned and gestured to a bench layered in bear pelts. Speak and drink, Leif sat. We come bearing walrus ivory, fox pelts, and weapons forged from Uppsala iron. In return, we seek silver, horses, and safe passage down the Daugava to the rivers of the Russes. Radek examined Leif's dagger. Norse make, good balance. But what will you offer for what cannot be bought? Yrsa stepped forward, tossing an embroidered pouch onto the table. Inside, a single coin, round, with Arabic calligraphy etched in gold. Radek's eyes widened. You've met the eastern winds already? No, Leif said. But we know where they blow, Radek chuckled. Then I shall make you an offer. He stood and clapped his hands. From the shadows, a young woman entered holding a black cloth. She unfolded it, revealing 3 objects: a bronze key, a wax-sealed scroll, and a carved tile shaped like a crescent moon. Radek spoke. One of these will buy your passage. One will lead to ruin. One is a lie. Leif did not move. Yrsa raised a brow. You deal in games? Radek smiled. All true trade is a test. Eric stepped beside Leif and whispered into his ear. Leif nodded and pointed. The tile, Radek clapped again. You choose the lie. He threw back his head and laughed. Wise. You'll go far. The scroll, Radek revealed, was real, but expired. The key opened nothing. The tile? A token from a long-dead order of desert merchants. You may pass, Radek said, but beware. Every river leads to Teef. As they departed with a sack of silver and 2 small horses tethered behind them, Leif turned back once. Radek stood alone beneath the amber ropes, watching them, smiling. Yrsa whispered. I liked him, Leif replied. That's what worries me. The fog lay thick across the marsh. Reeds bent under invisible winds, and the river moved silently. Too silently. Leif tightened his grip on the rope, tethering their horse to the ferry. The path Radek had allowed was downstream, wide and watched. This one, Borislav's crossing, was narrow and forgotten. This place stinks of secrets, Yrsa muttered. They all stink, Arik said, surprising them with a rare whisper. Borislav emerged from the reeds with a crooked pole and a grin that stretched unnaturally. You seek a quiet road, no? Silent water, the kind that makes men rich and gods blind? Leif nodded. The kind that leaves no name behind. Borislav patted the long, flat raft tied to a hidden post. You'll fit, just barely. But no questions, yes? No promises, Yrsa replied as they loaded the goods. Furs, iron, salt. Yrsa peeked beneath one of Borislav's canvas bundles. Inside, black glass beads shaped like eyes, likely cursed. and pouches of opium marked with Arabic script. "These aren't your wares," she said. Borislav giggled. "No, but I keep them. Everyone owes me something." East, west, north, south. They all passed through Borislav. He pushed them off with a grunt. The raft drifted silently between curtain walls of mist and wet reeds. The water below was black. No one spoke. But Eric's head turned suddenly. He jumped into the reeds without warning. A cry rang out. Moments later, he returned, dragging a stunned lookout by the collar. Borislav winced. "No need for death. He's mine." Eric dropped the man wordlessly and sat again. Leif scowled. "You were selling us out?" Borislav shrugged. "Just one plan of many. I make space for winners." Yrsa gripped her blade, but Leif stopped her. "He's not worth the blood," he said. "But his route is." They continued, tension thick as the fog. Hours later, they emerged from the marsh into a wide bend of the Daugava River. Civilization returned. Faint fires, distant bells, dock cranes on the horizon. Borislav tied his boat to a stone post. "You live, you learn," he said. "Next time, don't trust a man with 3 belts." Leif tossed him a coin. "Don't spend it in one betrayal." Borislav grinned wider. "Oh, I'll buy 2. As they rode away along the riverbank path, Yrsa turned to Leif. "He would have slit our throats if it profited him," Leif replied. "True, but he would have buried us with style." The river narrowed again, curling into a shallow lake ringed with dead trees. The water was brown and unmoving, and the air carried the rot of silt and something older, something sacred. There, in the center of the lake, stood a stone ruin, half-flooded, vines draped across its pillars, moss growing over cracked idols carved in the likeness of forgotten gods. 2 stone wolves guarded the entrance, their muzzles chipped, their backs swallowed by reeds. Leif signaled the crew to halt. "We anchor here tonight. That place was once sacred." Yrsa eyed the shrine. "It still is." They disembarked and waded knee-deep to the ruined causeway, boots squelching with every step. The wind was silent. No birds, no insects, only ripples that didn't come from them. Eric vanished into the trees. Inside the shrine, Yrsa lifted a torch. Its flame danced across broken images. Serpents, bears, and hands reaching toward stars. Hybrid runes spiraled across the archways, Slavic, Norse, and another unidentifiable. "It was shared," she murmured. "A meeting place between worlds." Leif knelt near the altar, where a bowl still sat. Inside, blackened coins, bone dice, and feathers. He added one of his own coins. "Let the dead know we mean no harm." Swala stepped inside last. Her face was pale and gleaming in the firelight. She stared into the shadows above the altar, then her knees gave out. She collapsed with a gasp, and her eyes rolled back. The crew rushed to her side, but she began to speak. Not her own voice, but something deeper. "You sail rivers of bones. You eat the grain of borrowed land. You carry fire from frost, and it will melt even gods. Beware the golden man. Beware the whispering sand. Silence." Then she wept. Leif held her gently, not speaking. Outside, Eric returned, carrying a half-buried skull, round and weathered, with polished edges, worn by water, not time. He handed it to Leif. "This was their priest," Svala whispered. "His voice lives here still." They built no fire that night. Instead, they lit oil in small clay cups and placed them along the shrine's edge. Yrsa stood guard at the front, torch unlit. "We shouldn't have come," she whispered. Leif replied, "We needed to." At dawn, the lake shimmered like glass. Mist rose. The shrine seemed younger, for a moment, reborn by the light. They left without speaking again. But every man glanced back, once, and none of them forgot what they had heard. Noise slammed into them like a wave. The riverside market of Vishgrad reeked of salt, sweat, and deception. Wooden stalls leaned against boats, carts, and stone walls. Chickens screamed. Bells clanged. Somewhere, a lute player sang off-key in a dialect none of them recognized. Leif walked cautiously between vendors, followed by Yrsa and Eric. They passed crates of honeycomb stacked beside butchered pigs. Next to them, an old man sat cross-legged, selling iron rings that whispered if held long enough. The salt market was at the far end, a place of both wealth and sudden death. Bales of cured meat and slabs of amber sat beside rusted armor and stolen icons. Everything was for sale, even curses. Market Master Ilya spotted them and waddled forward with open arms. "My friends from the north, welcome, welcome. Salt is dearer than silver today. But you bring gifts?" Leif opened a satchel. Inside, snowfox furs, a bar of walrus ivory, and a carved dagger with a pommel shaped like a raven's skull. Ilya sniffed. "These are old gods. Our buyers prefer the eastern ones now." Yrsa stepped forward, pulling a scroll with symbols copied from their previous trade stop. "Perhaps this will help." Ilya's eyes widened. "Where did you find this?" "Where the water forgets its name," Yrsa said coldly. He laughed. "Ah, poetry and furs. You tempt me." Eric stepped between them and said nothing, but Ilya noticed the bloodstain on his axe head and grew quiet. Suddenly, a shout rang out. Two men grappled near the salt crates. One had a curved dagger, the other a meat hook. Both were young, rag-wrapped, and desperate. Leif watched closely. "Let it play," Ilya said. Eric stepped sideways, eyes sharp. The fight escalated. One man bled from the thigh. The other knocked over a salt barrel, crystals spilling like treasure. Inside, Yrsa spotted something else, not just salt. "Slips of folded paper, smuggler's codes," she muttered. She snatched one, slipping it into her sleeve. The fight ended quickly. One man down, breathing shallow. The other fled. Ilya looked pleased. "Now, let us talk seriously." He led them to a shaded tent with jars of rare dye and vials of powdered bark. "These are from the Far East," he said. "Not even Radek touches them." "What do you want for passage and ink?" Leif asked. "Only one thing," Ilya grinned. "Trust!" Yrsa laughed. "It cost more than salt." And they traded for 2 crates of sea-dyed linen and a scroll sealed in wax bearing the sigil of a black bird. It would allow safe docking 2 towns downstream, so long as they didn't mention Radek. Eric stepped out of the tent and reached behind a wooden post. He pulled a knife from its hiding spot, pointed right where Leif would have stood. He snapped it in 2. They left Visegrad before sunset, under a sky streaked red. Behind them, Ilya smiled and muttered, "Let the waters judge them next." They came not with weapons drawn, but with torches and roasted boar. The river wolves greeted them at dusk with music made from stretched hide drums and reeds. Their encampment rested beside a sweeping bend in the river, a small fortress of sharpened logs, tents dyed red and firelight flickering across the water. Leif led his crew forward, their weapons sheathed but never far. Bogdan the river wolf awaited them, arms crossed, laughing as they approached. "Ah, the north finally sends wolves of its own." Leif offered a hand. Bogdan clasped it hard and pulled Leif close in a half embrace. "You drink, you speak, then maybe you pass." So they feasted. Spits turned over flame, dripping grease into fires that hissed and spat. Mead flowed freely, strong enough to bite twice. Songs were sung, crude and full of conquest, and stories of the river's strange monsters were told like lullabies. Yrsa sat beside a younger woman with inked arms and a scar that traced her jaw. The woman leaned in and whispered, "Watch the third cup. The second is safe. The third tastes like truth, and not all men like its flavor." Leif was handed a horn full of something viscous and dark. Bogdan raised his own. To travelers who smell of ice and iron, the crew drank. Leif winced but swallowed. It burned like pepper and oil. "A test," Bogdan smirked. Good. Most vomit. Eric was challenged. Next. One of Bogdan's warriors leapt forward with a wooden spear and invited combat. Without hesitation, Eric stepped into the ring. They circled. The crowd roared. The fight was swift. 3 feints, a parry, then Eric disarmed the man and spun him to the ground. No flair, just control. He helped the warrior up and said nothing. The river wolves cheered. Bogdan laughed. You are Death's left hand, aren't you? Later, Bogdan pulled Leif aside and poured fresh mead. You go south. You want the river of gold and silk, yes? Leif nodded. We want a road. And allies, Bogdan sighed. The river splits beyond here. One arm is deep but watched. The other is shallow and forgotten. Guess which one I prefer? I've been warned about both, Leif said. Then choose a third, Bogdan growled. We made one once, a side path, swampy, rotten, but quiet. He handed Leif a map drawn in ash on birch bark. You follow this. I'll send a guide halfway. Yrsa stepped up beside them. What do you want in return? Bogdan grinned. A pact. He cut his palm and smeared blood into a bowl of river mud. He offered it to Leif. Leif dipped 2 fingers in and pressed them to the stone fire ring. Done, he said. Bogdan nodded. Then the wolves will howl for you. At least once. They left at dawn, heads clear but eyes watching the mist. The river wolves sang behind them, and the river opened into forks ahead. The feast had passed. The road was only beginning.
They reached the river fork by midday, where the great Daugava split into twin silver arms. One wide, shimmering, lined with fishing boats and distant towers, the other narrow, thick with weeds and fog, no signs of life. Leif stood at the bank, map in hand, weighing the choice. The wide route takes us into cities, he said, but with eyes on every dock, Yrsa pointed to the marshy path. This one winds like a snake, but snakes can go where wolves can't. Eric said nothing but walked to the edge of the misted river. There, in a nest of willow roots, stood a small stone carved in the shape of a human hand. It was broken, fingers missing, yet still upright. An old shrine left by travelers long forgotten. 3. He removed a ring of bone from his pouch, one taken from the cairn on the island of bones, and placed it gently at the shrine's base. No words, just silence. When he returned, Leif gave a slow nod. Danko appeared soon after, barefoot, reeds braided into his hair, his voice high and uneven. You seek the third path, the one that does not like to be found, Leif said. We need it. Danko grinned. Then speak the oath. All who walk it must, Yrsa frowned. Oath? Danko raised his arms theatrically. Speak. We are not the wind that crushes, but the mist that slips. We do not leave footprints. We are never followed. Leif hesitated, then repeated Bredem. We are not the wind that crushes, but the mist that slips. We do not leave footprints. We are never followed. One by one the others echoed it. Danko grinned. Good. The river will allow you now. They stepped into their vessel and pushed off. Tight. The swamp path wound tightly, the water choked with reeds and shadows. Trees leaned in like eavesdropping giants. Dragonflies buzzed lazily. Birds watched from high branches but did not sing. Danko navigated with a stick, tapping one log, avoiding another. Some float, he said. Some bite. They passed a drowned wagon, its wheels still spinning slowly beneath the current. Yrsa marked turns in her scroll, noting the glyphs Danko showed her. Spirals, bird tracks, triangles carved into bark. By nightfall, they anchored near a bent willow that looked like an old man leaning on a cane. No fire, only silence. Even the bugs were quiet, Leif whispered. This path is older than the other two. Danko grinned. Older than the river itself. That night, dreams came heavy. Leif dreamt of being underwater, speaking to a man with no eyes who offered him salt from his palm. Yrsa dreamt of wolves running on water. Eric did not sleep. He watched the river flow backward for a moment, and didn't blink. The fog thickened like old milk. The longship moved slowly now. Oars lifted and pushed only when silence allowed. The reeds brushed their hull like fingertips, some soft, some sharp. Fires ahead, Danko whispered, eyes wide. Leif narrowed his eyes. In the mist, flickers, green, blue, yellow, like distant campfires dancing above water. But they never stayed still. They shimmered and shifted, appearing in one place and vanishing in another. We'll owe the wisps, Yrsa muttered. Or worse, we approach on foot, Leif decided. They beached the ship in a pocket of mud and tied it to a willow trunk. Yrsa led. Leif followed. Eric shadowed behind. Svala stayed near the water, murmuring. The lights moved slowly, always just out of reach. Yrsa tracked footprints through muck, wide, flat, three-toed. Not animal, she whispered. Not man. They found the remains of a camp, abandoned but recent. A fire ring made of human teeth. A broth pot still warm. Inside it, a carved wooden spoon shaped like a tongue. Eric held up a charm he'd found near the water, an oval medallion with a curling spiral. Leif frowned. That's a river cult rune, old, banned. Just then, Svala shrieked from afar. They sprinted back, weapons drawn. She stood waist deep in water, her arms stretched to the sky. Names, she cried. They are calling from below. Yrsa pulled her back. Leif gripped her face. What do you see? 3 paths. One leads in circles. One leads beneath. One leads to a mouth, Danko whispered. It is true. The swamp tricks the feet. Leif scanned the map again. The old route curved hard west before turning south again. They had drifted off course. We're inside the circle, Leif said. That's why we see fire. That's why nothing stays still. Eric plunged his axe into a tree. Sap oozed out red, almost like blood. They turned back, following the curl of the old trail. The fires faded behind them. The air cleared. As the sky lightened before dawn, they returned to the ship. Svala slept deeply. Danko said, if we had followed the lights, we would have joined them, Leif replied. Not today. The swamp gave way to higher ground. Barely a rise, but enough. Trees grew here, bent low but tall enough to form a canopy of moss and shadow. Birdsong returned, warbled and broken, like flutes played by memory. This is Sarek's Hollow, Danko said, named for a man who spoke too often and too sweetly. Yrsa raised an eyebrow. Is that a warning? No, he replied, smiling. It's an invitation. At the center stood a massive willow, roots gnarled and twisting like knuckled fingers. Its bark was marked in deep vertical gouges, each filled with dried resin. Leif circled it slowly. The singing tree, Danko whispered. It hums when the wind forgets where it's going. Yrsa touched one of the gouges. It vibrated faintly, like the low note of a harp strung across the earth itself. Leif called for rest. They tied the longship to a half-sunken stump and gathered around the hollow's edge. Svala sat at the tree's base. She trussed the roots, humming softly. Then the tree answered. A faint tone, barely audible, resonated through the hollow. Svala's voice shifted, matching it exactly. Yrsa looked to Leif. She's not making that up. Eric dug near the roots and uncovered a child's offering, a comb snapped in half, a small leather shoe, and a red bead carved like a laughing mouth. She's singing someone else's song, he said. Svala's voice rose. She began to chant in a language none of them recognized. Leif stepped closer, but didn't interrupt. She sees something, Danko said. Svala's eyes snapped open. The river ends in fire. Ray? The east is not soil, it is breath. One of us must stay. One of us will drown not in water, but in gold. Then she collapsed. Leif caught her, lowering her gently to a pile of leaves. She breathed steadily, though tears leaked from her eyes. Yrsa turned to Danko. Is this place cursed? He shook his head. No, it's memory. The tree remembers songs. And tonight, it remembered hers. The crew slept in shifts. Eric sharpened weapons. Yrsa mapped the symbols on the tree. Leif sat awake, staring at the moon through the willow branches. the faint hum of the singing tree vibrating in his bones. The river narrowed again. It wasn't the width that bothered them. It was the sound. A deep groaning came from beneath the water, like stone grinding against bone. Wind didn't move here. Birds didn't call, and even the water's ripples seemed hesitant. "This is the toll," Danko whispered. Leif furrowed his brow. "What toll?" Danko looked at him solemnly. "Not gold, not blood. Something you carry." He pointed toward the water. "It knows weight." The longship drifted forward, oars raised. The current pulled harder. Stones scraped the hull, sharp and deliberate. Eric took the oars again. "Row or drift?" Leif asked. "Row," Eric muttered. Yrsa sat at the bow, bowstring half drawn, eyes scanning the reeds. She saw movement. Quick, small, slithering. "Something's here," she said. Behind them, Svala sat cross-legged, rocking, slowly. Her voice rose, just a breath above the wind. She whispered words that sounded like sobbing syllables. "Do not look. Do not name. Do not weigh." Leif stared at the waters. Shapes moved beneath, shadowy things. Arms? Fins? Impossible to say, Eric grunted, muscles straining. His skin glistened with sweat. Leif grabbed a spare oar and began to row with him. Each pull echoed like thunder in his chest. The ship groaned. The current felt like a hand trying to twist them backward. A crack echoed. One of the oarlocks snapped. Yrsa stood, loosing an arrow into the reeds. Something hissed. Then silence. Leif yelled, "Hold course," but Danko was gone. His seat was empty, and on it, a carved figure of a man with no eyes and a closed mouth. Svala's chant grew louder. "Do not measure us. We have paid. We have given. Let us pass." Then, as suddenly as it began, the current eased. The ship moved freely. No shadows, no sound, only water and sky. They looked around. No sign of Danko, only the carving remained. Svala wept, not for Danko, but for what he left behind. "He gave the toll," she said. "He chose it." Leif held the figurine, its closed mouth still damp with swamp water. "We remember him," he whispered. They rowed on in silence. Behind them, the river sighed. The river widened. The trees thinned until they became scattered skeletons on low, green banks. The air grew warmer, rich with the scent of earth, smoke, and something sweet. Leif stood at the bow. For the first time in weeks, the water ran smooth, clear, friendly. Behind them, the swamps receded into a smear of green and memory. Ahead, the river opened like a mouth, yawning into vastness. Yrsa raised a hand. Boats. In the far distance, 3 curved silhouettes moved slowly. Not Viking longships, not flatland skiffs. These had square sails and hulls painted in swirls of blue and gold. "We're seen," she said. Eric stepped ashore briefly at a sandy bend where the river twisted once before it ran straight again. He crouched beside an abandoned fire pit. In the ash, shards of red-painted pottery and a coin stamped with unfamiliar markings. Leif turned the coin over in his fingers. "Southern trade routes." Svala stepped into the water up to her knees. She lifted her driftwood staff and whispered, "We have crossed the spine of the world. The North no longer knows our names. We are foreigners now." Leif nodded. That was always the plan, but something in his voice sounded less certain. As they pushed off once more, the wind rose from the east, warm, dry, and scented with spice. The sky was clear, no fog, no ghosts, only horizon. The current caught them gently, like a hand meant to lead, not test. Yrsa closed her eyes briefly. "Feels like a different world it is," Svala said. They sailed forward in silence, until the trees became grasses, and the grasses gave way to fields. In the sky, new birds wheeled, long-winged, bright-colored, crying in tones no one had heard before. Svala sat beside the carved figurine left by Danko. She placed a flower over it and sang softly. Eric did not speak. Yrsa sharpened her knives. Leif watched the river curve again, this time toward the unknown. and they sailed on. The Dnieper flowed thick and golden under the morning sun, its banks thick with pine and black soil. At its bend stood a fortress of timber, high-walled and crowned, with wooden towers crowned in fir banners. The gates opened with a groan. 4 Vikings stepped forward, silent, measured, carrying no raised banners, only dust and heat on their backs. Prince Vladko's guards awaited them, cloaked in forest green, spears upright, faces painted in white swirls. Ritual warriors, more symbol than soldiers. Leif raised a hand. "We are not raiders," he called. "We bring news and story and silence," a deep voice answered. "Then enter. But you'll leave lies at the threshold." The gate opened further. Inside, the timber fortress smelled of fire, horsehair, and sour bread. Wooden homes crowded close. Chickens squawked in corners, and children peeked from under fur-lined curtains. At the far end stood the prince. Vladko sat beneath a large archway of antlers, hands on his knees. His fur cloak spilled over his throne like a mountain's shadow. "Northmen," he said, "we've not seen your kind this far inland in many moons." Leif stepped forward. "Because the wind changed." Vladko chuckled. "Do you bring treasure?" "No," Leif said. "Then why not turn you to bones and wear your hair as belts?" Yrsa's hand twitched near her knife. Leif replied calmly, "Because we bring something rarer than gold." Vladko leaned in. "A tale?" Leif nodded. "A true one, and if you find it worthy, you grant us safe passage. If not, we die here." The prince raised an eyebrow. "Then speak." Leif removed his axe, not in threat, but in reverence. He planted it into the ground before him like a totem. Then he knelt and began. He told the story of the storm on the sea of ice, of the lost oarlock, of Svala's chanting and Eric's silence. He spoke of the child's skull on the island of bones, and of Danko, who vanished into the river's toll. The words were not grand. They were spare and slow, delivered with stillness and gravity. When he spoke of dreams, even the wind paused. Svala, listening, closed her eyes and whispered under her breath in Old Norse. Vladko's eyes flashed. "Speak clearer," he said sharply. "It was a proverb," Svala murmured. "We say it to those who offer shelter to strangers. He who lets in wolves must dance with the moon." Vladko grunted. "Fair enough." He stood. "Many come here with silver and fine blades. You come with ghosts and frost. But perhaps that's worth more." He turned to his guards. "Let them eat, let them bathe, speak to our scribes. But first," he added, "answer me this. What is the thing you carry that gets lighter the more you give away?" Leif smiled. "A story." Vladko's eyes narrowed. Then he laughed. "Northmen," he shouted, "come, let's trade lies and wine." That night, the Vikings feasted in the citadel's hall. Warm food and laughter easing muscles, long hardened by weeks of tension. But none removed their weapons, not out of fear but ritual, for the Dnieper welcomed guests. But it remembered them long after they passed. They left the river behind them. The shortcut promised by Vladko's warriors was no road. It was a corridor of twisted trunks, moss-slick stones, and silence so deep that even their own footsteps felt unwelcome. Leif moved first, hand on the hilt of his dagger, watching for changes in light and ground. Behind him, Yrsa scanned the canopy, bow slung and eyes narrow. The farther they walked, the more it felt like the forest was walking with them, not around them. With them, Svala whispered. These trees were not planted. They chose to be here. Eric grunted, bending low to examine a trail of broken bark. He gestured, a symbol they'd developed for recent disturbance. "Something heavy, not human." Leif looked up. "We're being watched, not watched," Svala corrected. "Listened to." They stopped briefly at a clearing choked with ferns and crooked saplings. Yrsa bent beside a stump. "Burned," she said, "years ago, but this tree was cut. Not felled by lightning. Someone marked this place." Etched into the trunk was a spiral wrapped in an open eye. It shimmered faintly even in shadow. Eric stepped away, restless. Svala walked forward and began to draw with her staff. Circles, lines, triangles of protection. "What are you doing?" Leif asked. "Giving the forest something to listen to that isn't our breath." The wind shifted, no birds sang, no insects buzzed. The creak of wood sounded not natural, but intentional. Yrsa knelt and placed 3 stones in a triangle on the soil. "We're being flanked," she muttered. "Not animals, not scouts. Something quieter." Leif looked at the sky. The canopy here was too thick for sun. "Light a lantern," he ordered softly. Svala held up her hand. "No fire. Not here." Eric drew a bone charm from his pouch and placed it on a fallen log. A moment later, it snapped in half by itself. Leif hissed, "Move, now." They adjusted formation, Yrsa ahead, Eric at the rear. Svala recited softly in Norse Britain, "By root and crown. Ko, by claw and howl. Ko, let leaf turn ear. Ko, let tooth turn slow." Forest stirred again. The shadows seemed to part slightly, allowing a narrow trail to appear. Barely more than a rabbit path, they took it. For 2 hours they walked. The air grew warmer, the trees more spaced, the ground dry. At last a stream bubbled into view, running across their path. The moment they crossed it, the silence broke. Birdsong returned, insects buzzed, the forest exhaled. Svala collapsed at the stream's edge. Yrsa drank without speaking. Eric stayed still, listening, always listening. Leif knelt beside a tree, closed his eyes, and placed his palm on the bark. "Thank you," he whispered. Behind them, no footsteps followed, but the forest would remember. The first stone hit Leif's shoulder like a thunderclap. It came from the trees, small, fast, sharpened at the edges. Before the pain fully registered, another hit Eric's thigh. Then the screams, not war cries. Whistles, high-pitched and coordinated. "Cover," Leif barked. The crew dove for the tree line, as a flurry of bone-tipped arrows rained down. Shadows danced between trunks, white-painted figures with skull helms and eyes rimmed in red. The Painted Clan. Yrsa rolled behind a fallen pine and loosed an arrow. One of the white figures dropped soundlessly. "Behind us too," she shouted. Svala dropped to her knees and slammed her staff into the earth. "They're not spirits. They want to be." She began to chant in a mixture of Norse and Slavic, a language made of hums, sharp syllables, and drawn-out tones. Her voice wavered but carried. Leif gritted his teeth. Eric, left flank, the silent warrior burst forward. His axe swung low and upward in one fluid motion, cracking bone and armor alike. One Painted Clan warrior shrieked and collapsed. Leif slashed at a second attacker, his blade catching in the man's jaw. Blood sprayed onto the leaves. Yrsa drew her twin knives and spun, ducking a bone club strike. She stabbed upward through a stomach, twisted, then threw her second blade into another's thigh. Eric blocked a thrown net, his axe smashing the cords apart. He took a hit to the ribs, stumbled, then drove a knee into his attacker's chest. Svala kept chanting. Suddenly, the enemy froze. Some dropped their weapons. Others turned and vanished into the woods, as if drawn by invisible hands. The silence returned. Only the wounded groaned. Leif stood over one of the fallen clan warriors, painted spirals across his neck, a necklace of bird bones and tree bark. At the base of a tree behind him, a mark painted in blood, an open eye with no pupil. Yrsa exhaled. "They don't fight to kill, they fight to warn, they test," Eric said softly. Svala opened her eyes. "They don't want us here, but they won't stop us. Not yet." Leif wiped his blade clean. "They'll return, with more. Or worse." They regrouped, bound wounds, gathered fallen arrows. Svala burned a handful of dried herbs into the wind. "Next time, they'll know our names," she said. Leif nodded. "Then let them know who we are." A great clearing opened beside the river, ringed by fire pits and a gathering of oaks. Tall wooden poles stood in a circle, each wrapped in vines, fur, or bones, totems of the forest clans. Smoke rose from earthen braziers, a low drumbeat pulsed like a heartbeat in the soil. The Vikings entered in silence. Leif led them to the center of the ring, where Chieftain Radomir sat on a carved stump draped in elk hide. "You've passed through cursed water," Radomir said, "and fireless lands. Now you stand before us. What do you offer?" Leif bowed. "We bring story, skill, and silence where it's needed. We seek not gold, but path." Radomir's eyes narrowed. "And what do you leave behind?" Leif drew a scroll from his belt and unrolled it. It bore a line drawing of their journey from the fjords to the Dnieper, scratched in coal and oil. "Truth," he said. "Our line, carved into land." The chieftain stood. "Then you will show more." He gestured. A bow was brought forward, Slavic, reflex curved, decorated with tiny metal studs. A target was placed across the clearing, a piece of carved antler with a red spiral painted at its heart. Yrsa stepped forward before anyone else moved. She took the bow, pulled the string, no words. Just one breath, and released. The arrow struck not the spiral, but just beside it, where the curve of the horn met the core. The target split. Radomir's smile was thin, precision. He nodded at a pair of guards. Suddenly, a third figure moved from the crowd, dressed in ceremonial robes, but drawing a hidden dagger. Before anyone could shout, Eric moved. He covered the space in seconds and twisted the man's arm back. The blade dropped to the dirt. A gasp rippled through the crowd. "A traitor," someone hissed. "No," Leif said. "A message." Radomir stepped forward. "Painted clan?" Svala nodded. "They seek to poison councils as much as rivers." Radomir raised a hand. "Then let us cleanse the intent." He brought Svala to the center of the ring. There, she stood beside the clan's elder Cirrus, a hunched woman draped in wolfskin and feathers. They each dipped a reed into ash and drew symbols across each other's hands, 2 spirals, 2 rivers, 1 tide. Then the drums stopped. Radomir turned to the crowd. "By fire, word, and precision, we accept them. For 1 year, they may walk the southern river under our favor. But," he added, turning back to Leif, "when you return, if you return, you owe me a gift." Leif nodded. "Name it." Radomir smiled. "Something the southern kings would fear to give." They reached the grove just past midday. It was not marked on any map, but the trees whispered it into being. Slender birches, standing in a perfect circle, the air thick with pine and silence. Leif raised a hand. "This is the place." They entered slowly, offering no words. Each one left something behind at the edge. Yrsa a feather, Eric a bone charm, Leif a piece of dried fish. Svala brought nothing but breath. In the grove there was no sound, no wind. The trees stood like watchers. Their white bark seemed to pulse faintly. Yrsa whispered, "This ground was used. Bones in the branches. Stripped clean." Eric pointed to the center. Flat moss, untouched, unbroken. Svala stepped forward, removed her shoes, and sat cross-legged. She closed her eyes and began to hum, a single note, long and low, like the cry of a faraway bird. Moments passed, then he appeared, not from behind a tree, not from the earth. He was simply there, the child with the black eyes. He wore no shoes. His tunic was made of strange threads, patterned with symbols that made the eyes itch. He carried a small birch box tied with red thread. Svala opened her eyes. She did not flinch. "You've been waiting," she said. The boy said nothing. Instead, he knelt and placed the box before her. She did not touch it. "Why us?" The boy blinked. His lips did not move, but his voice echoed, inside their skulls, not the air. "Because you dream in circles, and you left silence behind." Svala reached forward and untied the red thread. Inside the box was a disc of carved birch. One side bore a spiral, the other an image of waves and a broken bridge. "What does it open?" The child spoke again. "Pranda Gate, one time, east of the Caspian. But do not look back. If you do, the river will forget you ever passed." Leif stepped forward. "Are you spirit?" Or blood? The boy looked at him. Yes, Eric moved, suddenly sensing something, but the boy was gone. No footsteps. No wind, only moss and birch. Svala held the disc like it might burn her. This is old, older than all our gods. Leif took it carefully. Then we carry it lightly. As they left the grove, the birds sang again. Behind them, the birch trees stood still, but they seemed closer together now, whispering secrets only children could keep. Stood like a wounded giant. The ash tree's upper limbs were blackened by fire, its trunk cracked and leaking slow amber. Charred bark curled away in spirals. Around its roots, old offerings lay untouched, cracked pottery, dull knives, and bundles of braided herbs. This is no ordinary tree, Yrsa said quietly. Svala nodded. It is a tether. The Russ's villagers, few in number, watched from the edge of the grove. One elder, draped in dark fur and a long clay mask, approached. He did not speak. He simply pointed to the tree, then to Leif. Leif stepped forward and knelt. What happened? Svala answered instead. A fire, not by storm, arson or punishment. And now the forest bleeds. Leif placed his hands on the roots and bowed his head. Then he stood. We will help. The crew spread out. Yrsa dug gently around the root, uncovering buried rot and whispering protective chants. As she pressed new herbs into the soil, she found a burned patch of runes and carefully copied their forms into her palm. Blessing, she murmured. And a warning. Eric moved to a collapsed limb. With a breath, he lifted his axe and struck clean. Once, twice, the rotten wood cracked, and he dragged it free, revealing green beneath the black. He touched the heartwood and stepped back. Leif carried buckets from the river. He poured water slowly over the roots and whispered his son's name into the bark. Svala stood at the tree's base. She raised her staff and began to chant Badial by root and leaf. Kuno, by flame and breath, let silence bloom where once was death. The elder in the mask nodded. He reached into a pouch and withdrew 3 ash leaves, each pressed flat and dyed with red ochre symbols. He handed one to each of them. Svala interpreted, protection from false speech and broken oaths. The tree groaned once, just enough to shift its weight. The elder vanished without sound. That night they camped beside the ash tree. No fire was lit, only quiet. In the morning, the sap on the trunk glowed golden. The leaves, once curled and dying, had softened. Yrsa whispered, "It's healing." Leif pressed a hand to the bark. "We made a vow here, and the forest remembered." The trees parted, and the hill gave way to a view like none they'd seen. Below, lit in soft firelight and moonglow, sat Kiev, a sprawling wood and stone city nestled along the great river like a jewel placed in a woven crown. Torchlights marked the edges of the palisades. A great market lay beyond the southern gate, filled with echoes even from this height. Domed roofs shimmered silver. Smoke drifted from tall chimney towers. Flags fluttered above watchposts in the shape of eagles, stars, and sickle moons. The Vikings stood in silence. Leif exhaled. "That's not a village, that's a kingdom." Yrsa sat on a nearby rock, sketching quickly by moonlight. "It's like the stories we dismissed, too grand to be real." Eric said nothing. He crouched at the tree line, sharpening his blade. His ears twitched, always listening. Svala knelt and placed both palms on the earth. "They built it on crossroads," she murmured. "Lines older than memory. It will endure and also fall." Leif didn't answer. He stared at the towers, the lights, the faint sounds of a language he couldn't yet understand, drifting up through the trees. Behind them were the fjords, the ice, the mountain chants and sword songs. Ahead, silk sand and cities so large they made Kiev seem like a farmstead. But here, now, was a threshold. "We've passed from myth to map," Leif said softly. Yrsa looked up. "And we're not done. Kiev is a gate, not a home." Svala turned toward the moon. "One day, it will be both." The crew shared no toast, no speech, only silence and breath, and the understanding that from here everything would be different. The city of Kiev below glittered like a crown in firelight, and above it the moon rose, full, silent, and watching. The witch market was not in the city square. It was beneath it, through an alley guarded by copper bells and down mossy steps slick with incense soot. The Vikings entered a vaulted chamber of candlelight and whispers. No guards, no stalls, just women and men wrapped in shawls and silence, their goods spread on blankets and bones. Smoke drifted like fingers. "This place smells like memory," Yrsa murmured. Svala smiled faintly. "Because that's what they sell." Leif approached a hunched woman sitting behind a mound of carved stones. "I need passage to the south of the Caspian," he said. She sniffed him. "And what will you give?" He opened the pouch and removed a lock of blonde hair tied with red thread. "My son's," he said. "I haven't seen him in 3 winters." The woman nodded. She handed him a pebble carved with a crescent over a ladder. "When the time comes, put it in your mouth and speak nothing." He didn't ask why. Yrsa browsed a stall lined with charms, eyelash knots, bird bones, spider silk. The vendor, twin sisters who spoke in alternating words, offered her a birch token etched with rivers. In exchange, they said, a secret. Yrsa hesitated, then whispered something. They smiled. The token glowed briefly. Eric stood nearby, watching a man in a fox fur hat pass them 3 times. On the 4th, Eric moved. He said nothing, just caught the man's wrist mid-thrust, dagger barely out of sleeve. Shermersis. Just dagger, barely out of sleeve. The man's eyes widened. Eric shook his head slowly. The man vanished into the crowd. Svala sat across from a blind woman who burned salt in a clay bowl. "You seek the city of glass," the woman rasped. Svala tilted her head. "We don't know yet." "You will," said the crone, "but you will not all arrive together." Svala said nothing. Stick. She was handed a string of obsidian beads and told to place. One in the river when she sees stars reflected before sunset. The group reconvened in silence. They left with tokens, stones, whispers, and warnings. The market faded behind them like a dream evaporating at sunrise. Ruder of them spoke until they reached the street above. "Let's go," Leif said softly, and they did. Smoke curled above the trees like a slow-blown whistle. Leif stood at the edge of the river, one hand on the hilt of his blade, the other shielding his eye. A charred village lay ahead, tucked between willows and a shallow bend in the Dnieper. "Smoke's fresh," he murmured. "Half a day, no more." Yrsa crouched low, examining prints in the wet soil. No carts, no survivors, just fire and flight. Svala held her scarf over her mouth, eyes dark. This wasn't raiders. It was a warning. Leif turned to Eric, who nodded toward the eastern bank. 2 men, Eric said softly. "Watching." "Didn't approach, didn't run." "Painted clan?" Leif asked. Yrsa returned, a bundle of scorched reeds in her hand. "They left this behind." She unfolded a leaf packet to reveal a bone charm painted in ash. A single black circle over a field of red lines. Svala shivered. "They set fire not to destroy but to feed something." Leif exhaled through his nose. "We can't save ghosts, but we can honor them," Svala whispered. Together, they moved closer. But not inside. The village was blackened and broken. No animals, no bodies, only hollow shells of homes and the metallic sting of smoke and scorched iron. Eric found a child's carved toy near a well. He placed it gently at the edge of the path. Yrsa strung a string of dried berries between 2 burned posts. Leif removed the birch disc from his belt and dipped it into the river once, whispering words only the water could hold. Svala lit a small curl of herbs and let it smoke toward the sky. Then they turned and left. Behind them the wind shifted. The smoke followed briefly, then stopped, as if the village too had exhaled. The longhouse was warm, dim, and utterly silent. No laughter, No speech, not even song. The Vikings entered slowly, robes freshly gifted, weapons left respectfully outside. A long wooden table stretched across the hall, lined with bowls of steaming roots, grains, and fish wrapped in fragrant leaves. Chieftain Drazan greeted them with a bow of the head, his palms raised in peace. He said nothing. This was the silent feast, a rite shared only once per season among the forest clans, a gathering where words were forbidden, and all bonds were made through the language of hands, eyes, and food. Leaf sat near the head of the table, across from him a woman with white painted knuckles who passed him a sprig of rosemary and pressed 2 fingers to her heart. He nodded once, pressed the sprig to his brow, then placed it in his sash. Yrsa sat beside a girl no older than 10, who painted symbols in the ash on the table. Yrsa watched, then copied them carefully. Eric did not sit, he stood near the entrance, watching. He saw 2 men exchange glances. One wore the mark of a northern trader clan, the other a wristband made of woven hair. He made no move, just memorized faces. Svala sat cross-legged at the end of the room, her hands resting on her knees. She closed her eyes and matched her breathing with the slow rhythm of the meal. Food was passed, not by hand, but by gesture, a nod, a raised brow, a hand across the chest. The room danced in subtlety. No voice was louder than movement. Chieftain Drazan stood near the hearth. He did not eat, he watched. Then slowly he approached Leif and held out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a carved stone disc, marked with stars and waves. He gestured to the ceiling, then to the floor, then pressed the stone into Leif's hand. Leif bowed deeply. Svala opened her eyes. "The time is not yet," she whispered, though the ritual forbade speech. Her lips formed the words only in breath. As the meal ended, each guest placed a finger into a bowl of river clay and marked the center of the table. Dozens of prints formed a spiral, connecting all who had shared food and silence. The feast was over. The bonds were sealed. The Vikings left with full bellies and new weight in their hearts.